The woman arrived at dusk, when the Colorado sky bled orange and purple across the horizon. Late February, 1887. The kind of cold that settled into your bones and stayed there, no matter how many layers you wore. Laney Rowe stood at the edge of town like a ghost that hadn't quite decided whether to haunt or disappear. Tall for a woman, with black hair pulled back, severe and practical. Her face held that particular gauntness that came from too many meals missed and too many miles walked. The kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix showed in her eyes, dark eyes that looked at everything and gave away nothing. The horse station sat small and weathered at the frontier of what could barely be called a settlement, more of a stopping place than a town. Really, a handful of buildings huddled against the wilderness like they were afraid of being swallowed whole by the mountains looming beyond. She pushed through the door of the station's modest inn, bringing winter with her. The warmth inside hit like a wallwood smoke. Coffee, unwashed bodies, and that particular smell of leather and horse that never left places like this. "I need a place to sleep for the night." Her voice carried no plea, no explanation. Just fact, stated plain as the worn dress she wore. The fabric had been blue once. Maybe. Now it held the color of dust and distance. The innkeeper, a woman named Martha with arms thick from years of work, looked her up and down, not unkind, but not welcoming either. That was the way of frontier folk. They'd seen too many strangers with too many stories to trust easy. "Room's 2 bits, in advance." Laney's hand went to a small purse at her waist. The movement showed scratches on her wrists, half-healed and angry red against pale skin. Martha's eyes tracked the marks, but her face didn't change. Questions were dangerous currency out here. The coins Laney produced were few and counted careful. She placed them on the rough counter like she was laying down her last card in a losing hand. "That'll do." Martha swept the money away quick. "Room's upstairs, last door. Stove might still have some heat in it." The common room held a scattering of men, most nursing drinks that could have been coffee or could have been something stronger. They watched her the way wolves watch something moving at the edge of firelight, curious but cautious. A woman alone meant trouble of one kind or another. Either she was running from something or running to something, and neither option boded well for peaceful folk. Laney felt their eyes but didn't acknowledge them. She'd learned that returning stares only invited problems she couldn't afford. Her boots, cracked and muddy, left marks on the floor as she moved toward the stairs. "You come far, miss." The voice belonged to a man in merchant's clothes, trying to sound friendly. The kind of friendly that expected something in return. "Far enough." She didn't stop walking. "Headed somewhere particular. Somewhere that isn't here." That got a few chuckles from the darker corners of the room. The merchant's face flushed red, but he didn't push further. Even he could read the warning in her tone. At the bar, if you could call 3 planks and 2 barrels such a thing, stood Tom Garrett. He ran the horse station, had for near on 10 years. He'd seen plenty of women come through, wives following husbands west, daughters sent for by fathers who'd struck lucky, working girls headed for the mining camps. But this one was different. "That's the widow Rowe," someone whispered, though not quiet enough. "Heard tell her husband died bad up in Wyoming. Real bad." "Heard she killed him herself," another voice added. Lower still. "Heard lots of things," Tom said, loud enough to end the gossip. "None of them worth repeating." But his eyes followed her up the stairs just the same. In the corner, separate from the rest, one man hadn't looked up when she entered, hadn't joined the whispers. Silas McCrae sat with his back to the wall and his hat pulled low, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He had the look of a man who'd learned to be part of the furniture there, but not there, seeing everything while being seen by few. The talk swirled around him like smoke. Wyoming, dead husband, blood on her hands, maybe blood on her dress. Certainly, if you knew what to look for. And Silas did know what to look for. You didn't survive as long as he had in this country without learning to read the signs. He'd tracked men and cattle across territories that didn't have names yet. He'd sat quiet through range wars and Indian raids and all manner of human meanness. At 32, he'd already lived enough lives for 3 men, and each one had left its mark in the lines around his eyes and the careful way he moved through the world. Martha came back from wherever she'd stowed the woman's coins. "Don't you start Silas McCrae," she said, though he hadn't moved or spoke. "That woman's got enough troubles without you adding to them." "Wasn't planning on adding nothing," Silas said, quiet-like. "You got that look." "What look?" "The look says you're thinking of doing something stupid and calling it kindness." Silas finally raised his eyes from his cold coffee. "Since when is kindness stupid?" "Since it gets people killed." Martha wiped down the bar with more force than necessary. "That woman's running from something mean. You can smell it on her like smoke. Best leave her to run. Maybe she's tired of running. Maybe that's not your business to wonder." But Silas was already standing, settling his hat proper on his head. He'd made up his mind about something, though he couldn't have said exactly what or why. Sometimes a man just knew when the wind was about to change. Outside, night had finished falling. The temperature dropped like a stone, and frost already sparkled on the horse trough. Silas's ranch sat 5 miles north, far enough from town to avoid unwanted visitors, but close enough to get supplies when needed. He had a cabin there, sturdy and well-built. His own hands had set every log and sealed every gap against the wind. But there was another cabin, too. Smaller, older, built by the previous owner who'd given up on cattle and Colorado both. It sat empty at the edge of his property, close enough to the tree line that the pines whispered secrets to it all night long. He'd thought about tearing it down more than once, but something always stopped him, like maybe he'd known he'd need it someday. Like maybe that someday had just walked into town wearing a dead woman's dress and scratches on her wrists that looked too much like rope marks. Back inside, he could hear footsteps above, slow, careful, like someone learning the shape of a new cage. He finished his coffee in one cold gulp and left money on the bar. "Where you going?" Martha asked. "Home." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Silas paused at the door. Through the window, he could see snow starting to fall, just light flurries for now, but promising worse to come. A bad night to be alone with whatever ghosts you carried. A worse night to be without proper shelter. "She said she just needed a place to sleep," he said, not looking back. "They all say that," Martha replied. "Right up until they don't." But Silas was already stepping out into the cold, his mind made up. Sometimes a man had to choose between what was smart and what was right, and sometimes, on nights when the snow fell like secrets and the wind howled like grief, those two things pointed in different directions entirely. He'd wait, come morning, when she came down those stairs. He'd make his offer, simple and plain, the way honest things should be. A cabin with walls and a roof and a lock on the door. A place where running could stop, at least for a while. Whether she'd take it, well, that remained to be seen. But Silas had learned long ago that sometimes the best you could do was open a door and see who was brave enough to walk through. The snow kept falling, covering the mud and the tracks, making everything clean and new. By morning, it would look like a different world entirely. Maybe that's what she needed. Maybe that's what they both needed. A different world entirely. Morning came wrapped in fresh snow and bitter cold. The sun struggled through gray clouds, casting everything in that peculiar light that made the world look like an old photograph, all shadows and sharp edges. Silas McCrae stood in the corner of the common room, same spot as the night before. He'd been there since before dawn, watching the stairs, drinking coffee that Martha kept filling without being asked. His coat hung heavy with melted snow from the ride-in, and his boots had left puddles that nobody bothered to mop. The other early risers gave him space. They knew Silas by reputation, if not by friendship, a man who kept to himself, worked hard, and minded his own business. The kind of man you wanted on your side in a fight but wouldn't invite to Sunday dinner. He had a way of looking at people that made them feel seen clear through to their bones. And most folks didn't care for that kind of scrutiny. "You planning on growing roots there?" Martha asked, wiping down tables that didn't need wiping. "Just finishing my coffee." "Your 5th cup." Silas didn't answer. His attention fixed on the stairs as footsteps sounded above lighter than a man's, deliberate as someone counting the cost of each movement. Lainey Rowe descended like she was walking into deep water slow, careful, ready to turn back at the first sign of danger. The morning light showed what darkness had hidden the hollow of her cheeks, the wariness that lived in every line of her body. She'd tried to clean up some, her hair pinned tighter. The worst of the mud brushed from her dress, but tired clung to her like a second skin. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, taking in the room. Fewer men than last night, but the ones present watched her just the same. That calculating look, weighing her troubles against their own interests. Her eyes found Silas last, dismissed him as another piece of furniture, just how he preferred it. Most days, but not today. She approached Martha. "Is there work to be had, washing, mending, anything?" "Not here," Martha said, not unkindly. "Might try the boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Henderson sometimes needs help with the washing." "Thank you." Lainey turned to go, pulling a thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. It wouldn't do much against the cold outside, but pride kept her from shivering where people could see. Silas pushed off from the wall, moving into her path without quite blocking it. He had a way of taking up space without seeming to, learned from years of working cattle and harder things. "Ma'am." She stopped, wariness sharpening her features. Up close, he could see her eyes were brown, not black like he'd thought, brown like good earth, like coffee, like the wood of his father's rifle stock. "I might have work," he said, keeping his voice low, conversational. "No need to make a show for the gossips." "What kind of work?" "The kind that comes with a place to stay." Her chin lifted slightly. "I'm not looking for that kind of arrangement." "Neither am I." He let that settle between them, making sure she understood. "I run cattle north of here. Got a spare cabin sits empty. Needs cleaning, maybe some fixing up. You'd have the place to yourself. Lock on the door, stove that draws proper. In exchange, there's mending needs doing. Cooking when the hands are around. Honest work for honest shelter." She studied him the way a person studies thin ice before stepping on it. "Why?" "Why not? Men don't offer something for nothing." "Didn't say nothing. Said work for shelter. That's something for something. Way I figure it." Behind them, Martha made a noise that might have been approval or warning. Hard to tell with Martha. "I don't know you," Lainey said. "Name's Silas McCrae. I don't drink overmuch. Don't raise my hand to women or children. And I pay what I owe. That's all anybody needs to know about me." She kept studying him, looking for the trap. He didn't blame her. A woman alone learned to see traps everywhere because they usually were everywhere. "This cabin," she said finally. "How far from yours?" "Quarter mile, maybe less, close enough to be safe, far enough to be private." "And the lock?" "Good iron lock. I'll give you the only key." Something flickered across her face. Hope, maybe, or the ghost of it. But she tamped it down quick. Hope was dangerous for women like her. "I need to see it first." "Fair enough. Got my wagon outside?" She glanced toward the window where snow fell steady now. "In this weather?" "Weather's not getting better anytime soon. Might as well travel in it as wait for it." That got almost a smile. "Almost. You always this practical." "Only on days that end in Y." This time the smile nearly made it to her eyes before she caught it. "Let me get my things." Her things turned out to be one small carpet bag, worn at the corners and light enough that it couldn't hold much more than a change of clothes and whatever hope she hadn't yet surrendered. Outside, his wagon waited, the horses stamping and steaming in the cold. He helped her up, She took his hand reluctantly, let go quick, then climbed up beside her. The seat wasn't built for two, but they managed space between them. Proper space, the kind that said everything about who they were and what this was and wasn't. "That your only coat?" He nodded at her shawl, already collecting snow. "It suffices." He reached behind the seat, pulled out a heavy blanket that smelled of horse and leather and long use. "For the ride," he said, handing it over without quite looking at her. She took it after a pause, wrapped it around herself with movements that tried not to show relief. "Thank you." They rode in silence through the falling snow. The only sounds the creak of wheels and harness, the steady breathing of horses who knew the way home. The town fell away behind them, swallowed by white, until it might have been a dream they'd both had and woken from. The road, if you could call it that, wound through stands of pine and aspen, following the easiest path nature allowed. Silas handled the team with the unconscious skill of long practice, his attention seemingly on the horses but actually on the woman beside him. She sat rigid as a fence post, hands clutched in her lap, like she was holding herself together by will alone. "You can relax some," he said after a mile had passed. "I meant what I said about the lock. Men always mean what they say, until they don't." He couldn't argue with that. He'd known plenty of men whose words bent like spring ice under the weight of their wants. "You from Wyoming?" he asked instead, keeping his tone neutral as the weather. Her hands tightened in her lap. "For a time. Before that, does it matter?" "Not particularly, just making conversation." "I'm not much for conversation." "Fair enough." They rode another mile in silence that felt heavier than the blanket she wore. The trees pressed closer here, making a tunnel of the road. Snow sifted down through the branches like flour through a sieve. "Ohio," she said suddenly, like the word had escaped without permission. "Originally, but that was before. Such a small word to carry so much weight." Silas knew about befores. Before the war, before the trail drives, before he learned that some wounds didn't bleed but cut just as deep. "Good farming country, Ohio," he offered. "If you're a farmer." "You weren't." "My father was. I was just his daughter." Another mile. The horses knew to turn off the main road without being told, following a track barely visible under the fresh snow. The trees opened up here, revealing the sweep of valley that held his ranch. Mountains rose on three sides, protective and imprisoning both. "There," he pointed, "the main house, and there, by the tree line, that's the cabin." She followed his gesture, taking in the lay of the land with eyes that had learned to map escape routes. The cabin sat where he'd said, small but solid, smoke already rising from its chimney. "You lit a fire." "This morning, early. Figured it should be warm when we arrived." She gave him another of those measuring looks. "You were that sure I'd come." "I was that sure you needed to." The wagon rolled to a stop before the cabin. Up close, it showed its age logs gone silver with weather, chinking that needed attention, but the roof looked sound and the door hung straight in its frame. Someone had built it to last, even if they hadn't lasted themselves. Silas climbed down, came around to help her. This time she took his hand without hesitation, though she still let go quick. He pulled her carpet bag from the wagon bed, set it on the covered porch. "Want to see inside?" She nodded, following him to the door. He produced a key from his coat pocket, worked the lock. It turned smooth, well-oiled. "Been maintaining it," he said. "Never know when you might need an extra shelter." The door swung open on a single room. Simple but clean. A bed with a corn husk mattress against one wall, covered with quilts that looked handmade. A small table and two chairs by the window. The stove in the corner radiating welcome heat. Shelves with a few dishes. A coffee pot. Basic necessities. Lainey stepped inside, moving through the space like she was testing its reality. Her fingers trailed over the table, the back of a chair, the iron of the stove, at the window. She stopped, looking out at the view mountains and sky, an endless white. "It's quiet," she said. "That bother you?" "No." She turned from the window. "The work, when would I start?" "Tomorrow's soon enough. Today you settle in. There's food in the shelves, flour, coffee, some preserved goods, wells out back, privy too. Anything else you need? The main house isn't far." She nodded, still taking it all in. Then, like she just remembered something crucial, the key. He handed it over, watched her fingers close around it tight. Such a small thing, a key. But sometimes small things carry the biggest weight. "I'll leave you to it then," he said, moving toward the door. "Unless you need anything else." "No, this is good." He paused at the threshold, looking back. She stood in the middle of the room, blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, key clutched in her hand, looking lost and found all at once. "Lock it behind me," he said. "I will." He stepped out into the snow, pulling the door closed, stood there on the porch until he heard the lock turn, solid and final. Then he walked back to his wagon, not hurrying, giving her time to watch him go from whatever window she chose. At the wagon, he turned back once. The cabin looked different somehow, with smoke rising from its chimney and someone inside, less like a monument to failure, more like what it was supposed to be, shelter from the storm. "Just for sleep," she'd said at the inn. "Prove it," he said now, quiet enough that only the horses heard. Because he knew, the way you know weather's coming by the ache in old bones, that nothing about this was going to be that simple. A woman didn't run that far, or look that haunted over something simple. And a man didn't offer shelter to a stranger unless he recognized something in them, some shared knowledge of what it meant to need walls between you and the world. But for now, it was enough that she had a door she could lock and a fire to keep her warm. The rest would come as it would come. He climbed into the wagon, turned the horses toward home. Behind him, the cabin stood solid against the falling snow, keeping its new secrets as well as it had kept the old ones. Tomorrow there would be work and wages and the careful dance of strangers learning to exist in the same space. But tonight, she had what she'd asked for: a place to sleep, a lock on the door, and the promise that sometimes, in this hard country, that was enough to build a different life on. The snow kept falling, covering tracks and smoothing sharp edges, making everything new again. By the time he reached the main house, his own tracks were already disappearing. Good, he thought. Some paths didn't need following. Some doors were meant to stay locked until the person inside was ready to open them. He put the horses away, giving them extra grain for their trouble. Then he went inside to his empty house, to his own fire and his own silence, and tried not to think about how the cabin had looked with light in its windows and purpose in its rooms. But he did think about it, long into the night, while the snow fell and the wind sang through the pines. He thought about keys and locks and the kind of trust that started with a closed door. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. Tonight, they were just two people in separate shelters, riding out the same storm. The wind turned mean that evening, howling down from the mountains like it had grievances to settle. It found every gap in the cabin's chinking, every place where wood had shrunk away from wood, and made itself known. Lainey had been there 3 hours. 3 hours of testing the lock, checking the windows, learning the corners of her new cage, because that's what every shelter became eventually, a cage. The only question was whether you held the key. She'd built up the fire until the stove glowed red, but cold still crept in around the edges. The quilts on the bed smelled of cedar and long storage. The coffee she'd made was strong enough to float horseshoes, the way she'd learned men liked it. Old habits died hard, even when the men who demanded them were gone. Outside, full dark had fallen. Through the window, she could see snow swirling in the wind, could hear the pines creaking and complaining, but beyond that, nothing. No voices, no footsteps, no sounds of approach. She should have been relieved. Instead, she found herself standing at the window, looking toward where she knew the main house sat. A light burned there steady, distant, like a star that had decided to come to ground. He was there, Silas McCrae, the man who locked doors and walked away. The man who'd given her the key. She turned from the window, paced the small space. Her carpet bag sat unopened on the table. Unpacking felt too much like staying, and she hadn't decided yet if she was staying. The work he'd offered cooking, mending, she could do that, had done worse for less. But men who offered shelter always wanted payment eventually. And it was never just in darning socks and making biscuits. A sharp crack against the window made her jump. Just a branch, wind thrown, but her heart hammered anyway, and her hand went to her throat where bruises had faded but memory hadn't. Wyoming? The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She'd left more than a husband buried there. She'd left the woman who'd believed in promises, who'd thought love looked like possession and protection both. That woman was as dead as Thomas Rowe, and good riddance to them both. Another crack, louder, not a branch this time, the door, straining against the wind. The lock held, but the wood groaned. She moved toward it, listening. Under the wind was that footsteps on the porch, heavy, deliberate. Her breath caught, every muscle tensed for flight, though there was nowhere to run. The windows were too small, the walls too solid. She'd traded open danger for closed safety. And now, "Ma'am?" His voice came muffled through the door. "It's McCrae. Got something for you." She stood frozen, calculating distances and chances. The poker by the stove, the knife in her bag, the lock between them. "I'll leave it on the porch," he said when she didn't answer. "Just thought you might need it in this weather." His footsteps retreated. She waited, counting heartbeats, until she heard his wagon wheels crunching through snow. Only then did she ease to the window, peer out. He was already a shadow moving away, lantern swinging from his wagon. On the porch sat a bundle, another blanket, looked like, and something else, a coat, man's coat, heavy wool, too big for her but warm. She cracked the door, snatched the bundle inside, locked up quick. The coat smelled of tobacco and horse and man, but not unpleasant. In the pocket, she found mittens, hand-knitted, careful work. Why? The question circled her mind like a wary dog. What did he want? What payment would he expect for kindness? She put on the coat anyway. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, and the cold was real as the lock on her door. The mittens, too. They swallowed her hands, but warmth was warmth. Back at the window, she watched his lantern disappear into the swirl of snow. Then she turned to face the empty cabin, pulling his coat tighter around her. "Just sleep," she said to the silence. "That's all I said. Just sleep." But sleep felt far away as Wyoming, and twice as dangerous. The wind grew worse as night deepened. The cabin shuddered under its assault, but held. She fed the fire, made more coffee, tried to read the Bible she found on the shelf, but the words swam before her eyes. Every sound made her start. Every lull made her suspicious. Finally, exhausted by vigilance, she lay on the bed fully dressed, the coat still wrapped around her. The key lay cold in her palm. She'd sleep with it. She decided, in case of what he'd given her, the lock, the key, the solitude she'd asked for. But men's gifts always came with strings, invisible until they pulled tight. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every new sound. The wind played tricks, sometimes sounding like voices, sometimes like footsteps, sometimes like her name being called by people who couldn't possibly be calling. Near midnight, or what felt like midnight in that timeless dark, she woke to sudden silence. The wind had died. Snow still fell. She could see it through the window, but gentle now, peaceful. And in that peace she heard it, music, faint but real, carrying across the snow. A harmonica, simple tune, nothing fancy, Red River Valley maybe, or something like it. The kind of song cowboys played around campfires, lonely men making lonely music. She rose, drawn despite herself to the window. The main house was just visible through the falling snow, that steady light still burning. Was he out there on his porch, maybe? Playing to the night. The music continued, soft and sad and strangely comforting. It asked for nothing, promised nothing, just existed, like the snow and the dark and the space between his house and hers. She found herself humming along, then stopped, angry at the betrayal of it. Music was dangerous. It made you soft, made you forget why you'd run and what you'd run from. Thomas had played the fiddle when he courted her, played sweet until the ring was on her finger, then never touched it again except to smash it against the wall that one time when the harmonica stopped. The silence rushed back, twice as heavy for having been broken. She waited, but it didn't resume. After a while, the light in the main house went out. Now it was just her and the dark and the questions that wouldn't let her be. She went to the door, tested the lock again. Still solid, still sure. But locks only worked if you remembered you held the key, if you remembered you could leave any time, if you didn't let kindness make you weak and grateful and forgetful. "Prove it," she whispered, echoing words he hadn't said yet but would. Men always wanted proof eventually. Proof you were grateful, proof you were worthy, proof you understood the debt you owed. But what if he didn't? What if he really was just a man with an empty cabin and work that needed doing? What if the lock was exactly what he said, a way to feel safe, not a way to trap her? She laughed, short and bitter. Those were the kinds of thoughts that got women hurt, or worse. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, she kept pacing, wearing paths in the dust, wearing grooves in her thinking. The coat was warm. The mittens were soft. The cabin was shelter. All gifts, all chains, potentially. The fire burned low. She fed it again, mechanically. The night stretched on, elastic and endless. Somewhere in the walls, mice scratched and scurried. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the sounds of a place lived in, even if not by people. She must have dozed again, because suddenly gray light was seeping through the windows. Dawn, or its rumor. The storm had passed, leaving everything buried in white, beautiful and treacherous, like most things in this country. A knock at the door made her bolt upright, firm but not demanding, patient. "Ma'am, it's McCrae. Brought breakfast, if you're interested." She approached the door warily. Through the window, she could see him standing back from the porch, hands visible, unthreatening. He had a basket in one hand, steam rising from it in the cold air. "I'll leave it here," he said, "same as last night. Work starts when you're ready, no rush." He set the basket on the porch, turned to go, stopped, turned back but didn't approach. "That lock working all right?" "Yes," her voice came out rusty from disuse. "Good, that's good." He touched his hat brim, a gesture that might have been courtesy or might have been something else. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything." He walked away, not looking back. She waited until he was out of sight, then cracked the door. The basket held biscuits still warm, a jar of preserves, bacon wrapped in cloth, coffee in a tin pot. Enough for two, though he'd made no move to stay. She brought it inside, locked the door again. The food smelled like heaven and tasted better. When had she last eaten a meal she didn't cook herself? When had anyone last fed her without demanding something in return? Dangerous thoughts. She pushed them away, concentrated on eating, on surviving, on remembering why she was here and what she wasn't here for. But as she ate his food and wore his coat and sat in his cabin, she found herself thinking about that harmonica in the night, about the kind of loneliness that made music instead of meanness, about locks that kept things out but also kept things in. When she finished eating, she washed the dishes carefully, packed them back in the basket. Then she put on the too big coat, took a breath, and unlocked the door. The world outside was transformed, white and clean and new, like God had decided to start over. The path to the barn was already broken through the snow. He'd been up early. working while she'd slept. She followed his tracks, basket in hand. The barn was warm, smelling of hay and horses. She found him in a stall, brushing down a bay mare that looked too fine for ranch work. He looked up at her approach, and something flickered in his eyes, surprise, pleasure gone too quick to read. "Decided to start today after all." "The basket," she said, holding it out. "And thank you for the food and the coat." "It was my father's," he said, not taking the basket yet. "Been hanging in my closet 2 years now. Might as well get some use. I'll return it when you don't need it anymore." He took the basket then, set it aside. "You know horses. This is Buttercup, fool name for a horse. But she came with it. Needs brushing every morning. Think you could handle that?" It was work, simple work, the kind that didn't require closeness or conversation. She nodded. He handed her the brush. "I'll be fixing fence in the far pasture. Dinner's at 6, if you're willing to cook it. Supplies in the house, back doors open, lock it or not, your choice." He left her there with the horse and the brush and more trust than she'd earned. Buttercup turned her head, studying Laney with liquid eyes that held no judgment, only curiosity. She began brushing, long, steady strokes. The familiar motion soothed something in her. Horses were safe. They told no lies, made no promises they wouldn't keep. Their needs were simple food, water, shelter, kindness. Everything humans complicated. Through the barn door, she could see him in the distance, working on fence posts. Alone, but not lonely. Focused on the task at hand. He didn't look back toward the barn, didn't check on her, just worked, trusting her to do the same. Trust, such a fragile thing, so easily broken, so hard to rebuild. But maybe, in this place where locks meant safety and work meant purpose and silence meant peace, maybe trust could grow again, carefully, slowly, like spring coming to frozen ground. She brushed the horse and thought about keys and doors and the kind of proof that mattered. Maybe staying was its own kind of proof. Maybe maybe trust was just doing what you said you'd do, day after day, until the lock didn't matter anymore because you'd chosen to stay. But that was tomorrow's worry. Today, there was a horse to brush and a meal to cook, and a man who'd given her the key to her own cage. For now, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The nights were the hardest, when darkness fell and work ended, when there was nothing between her and her thoughts but thin walls and the whisper of wind through pines. It had been a week now. 7 days of careful routine brushing horses, mending torn shirts, cooking meals that Silas ate with quiet appreciation. 7 nights of locking her door and trying not to think about why she needed to. 7 dawns of waking to find fresh footprints in the snow where he'd passed by her cabin on his early rounds. Never stopping, never knocking, just passing. This night felt different. The wind carried ice in its teeth, rattling the windows like it wanted in. She'd banked the fire high, but cold still crept through the floors, up through the blankets, into her bones where it met the older cold that lived there permanent. She lay rigid in the narrow bed, his father's coat spread over the quilts for extra warmth. Sleep danced just out of reach, teasing, taunting. Every time her eyes drifted closed, she'd hear something or think she did, footsteps that weren't there. Voices calling names better left unspoken. Then, sharp as breaking glass, a branch cracked against the roof. She bolted upright, heart hammering. Just the wind, just the cold making wood contract and complain, but her body didn't believe what her mind knew. And she found herself standing, pacing, checking the lock for the 100th time. Through the window, the main house sat dark. He'd be asleep, like any sensible person. Warm in his own bed, untroubled by ghosts that wore familiar faces and spoke in voices that once promised love. She turned from the window, tried to settle. The Bible lay on the table where she'd left it after another failed attempt at reading. The words might as well have been written in a foreign tongue for all the comfort they offered. God felt far away from this cabin, from this territory, from women who'd done what needed doing and carried the weight of it after. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. She fed it another log, watched the flames catch and grow. Fire was honest at least. It warmed or burned. No pretense about which or why. A sound outside, different from wind, different from branches. Footsteps. Real this time. Crunching through snow. Measured. Deliberate. Coming closer. She grabbed the poker, held it ready. The footsteps stopped at her door. No knock, just presence, waiting. Laney. His voice came quiet through the wood. Not demanding, questioning. I saw your light. Everything all right? She stood frozen, poker raised, trying to make sense of it. Middle of the night, him at her door. But his voice held something she couldn't name. Not threat, not want, something else. I'm fine, she managed. You sure this wind's got the horses spooked? Thought maybe... He trailed off. She heard him shift his weight. Snow crunching. I'm heading to the barn. Check on them. Thought if you were wakeful, maybe you'd... But no, that's foolish. Sorry to disturb. His footsteps started moving away. She found herself at the door. Hand on the lock, before she decided to move. Wait. The footsteps stopped. She turned the key, opened the door a crack. He stood a good distance back, lantern in hand, casting wild shadows. He wore a heavy duster over his clothes, hat pulled low against the wind. His face, what she could see of it, looked tired, human tired. Not the bone-deep exhaustion she carried, but tired all the same. The horses, she said. I could help, if you need it. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of something kindred. I wouldn't say no to help, he said carefully. But it's cold, and... I'm already awake. She grabbed the coat from the bed, pulled it on over her nightdress. Propriety be damned. It was too cold and too late for such concerns. She stepped out, pulling the door closed but not locking it. What was the point, with her outside it? They walked to the barn in silence, the wind pushing at their backs like impatient hands. The lantern swung between them, making their shadows dance grotesque across the snow. Inside the barn, the horses moved restless in their stalls, eyes rolling white in the lamplight. Storms got them worked up, Silas said, hanging the lantern on a beam. Happens sometimes, like they sense something we don't. She moved to Buttercup's stall, let the mare smell her hand before entering. The horse calmed at her touch, and she began the soothing ritual of brushing, murmuring nonsense words that meant nothing and everything. Silas worked his way down the other stalls, checking hooves, adjusting blankets, offering the same quiet comfort. They worked in companionable silence. The only sounds, the horses' breathing and the wind's fury outside. Can't sleep either, she asked finally, surprising herself. Not on nights like this. He didn't look at her, focused on the gray gelding he was tending. Wind reminds me of other places, other times. She understood. Some nights carried memories on them like scent, unavoidable and overwhelming. Where? She found herself asking. Virginia, during the war. His hands never stopped their gentle work. You learn to hate the sound of wind through broken buildings, through places that used to be homes. You fought. Everyone fought, one way or another. He moved to the next stall. You're not from Wyoming originally. You said Ohio. Yes, the word came out short, clipped. But then, because the night and the work and his quiet presence made honesty easier. Married at 17. Thought I was lucky. Thought a lot of things that turned out wrong. He made a sound that might have been understanding. Didn't push for more. Just kept working, giving her space to fill or not as she chose. He changed, she said to Buttercup's flank. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. Either way, by the time I understood what he really was, it was too late. Marriage is a cage with no key, least not one a woman can turn. Until death do us part, Silas said quietly. She went very still. What do you know about it? Nothing. Everything. He was looking at her now across the lamplight, his face unreadable. I know Wyoming's a long way from Ohio. Know a woman doesn't travel that distance alone without reason. Know those marks on your wrists didn't come from kitchen work. Her hand went unconsciously to her wrist, though the marks were hidden under sleeves and darkness. And I know, he continued, gentle as his hands on the horses, that dead men don't come looking for their wives. The barn felt suddenly airless. She backed toward the door, flight instinct screaming. He didn't move to stop her, just stood there with his hands at his sides, waiting. I never said he was dead. No, but you're here, and he's not. And you lock your door like you're keeping out ghosts instead of men. Do the math how you want. Makes no difference to me. Then why? Because I've got my own ghosts. Because this territory's full of people running from or towards something. Because you work hard and don't complain and the horses trust you. And that's enough character reference for me. She stood trembling in the doorway, caught between running and staying. The wind howled around the corners of the barn, seeking cracks, seeking entrance. I'm not asking for your story, he said. Not asking for anything except what we agreed work for shelter. What you did or didn't do to get here. That's between you and God and nobody else. The gray gelding whickered softly. Outside, something banged against the barn wall, loose board. Probably. Or maybe just the wind playing tricks again. She found herself stepping back inside, closing the door against the cold. The horses are calmer now, she said. They are. They stood there in the lamplight, two people carrying weights they wouldn't name, finding something like understanding in the space between words. Finally. She went back to Buttercup, picked up the brush again. My father liked to play cards, Silas said suddenly. Lost more than he won. Lost the farm, eventually. My mother took sick that winter, no home, no money for medicine. She died before spring. The brush moved steady through Buttercup's mane. I was 15, joined up with a cattle drive heading north. Lied about my age. Figured I'd make enough to buy back the farm. Course, by the time I had the money, the farm was long gone. Everything was... What did you do? Kept moving, kept working. Built this place from nothing, board by board. Figured if I couldn't have what I'd lost, I'd make something new. Something that was mine to keep or lose. She understood that too, the need to build something that couldn't be taken away. Even if all you could build was walls. The wind died down some, its fury spent, or maybe just catching its breath. The horses had settled, no longer rolling their eyes at shadows. We should go, she said. It's late, early, whatever it is. He nodded, took down the lantern. They walked back through the snow, their footprints from earlier already half filled. At her cabin door, she paused. Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for helping. He touched his hat brim. That gesture she was beginning to recognize as his way of acknowledging things too complicated for words. Lock your door, Laney. Not against ghosts or men, just because you can, because it's yours to lock. She watched him walk away, lantern swinging, until the darkness swallowed him. Then she went inside, closed the door, stood there with her hand on the lock, thinking about cages and keys and the kinds of freedom that came from choosing your own walls. She turned the key. The lock clicked home, solid and sure. Then she went to the window, looked out at the night. His light was moving toward the main house, steady as a heartbeat. She thought about what he'd said, about building something new from the ashes of what was lost, about ghosts and the territory being full of runners, about trust being nothing more than doing what you said, day after day, until the lock didn't matter anymore. The wind had calmed to a whisper. The horses would sleep now, and maybe she could too. She banked the fire, hung up the coat that smelled now of barn and hay and honest work, got into bed still wearing her boots because some habits died hard. But for the first time since she'd arrived, maybe the first time since Wyoming, since Ohio, since she'd learned what men could do when they thought they owned you, she felt something that might have been peace, or at least the possibility of it. Tomorrow there would be work, horses to tend, meals to cook, clothes to mend. Simple things, safe things, things that built a life stitch by stitch, day by day. And maybe, eventually, she'd tell him the rest. About the night Thomas came home drunk and mean and swinging. About the cast-iron skillet and the sound it made. About burying what needed burying and running with dirt still under her nails. Or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe some stories were better left untold, buried like bodies in the frozen ground. Either way, she had a door she could lock and work that needed doing, and a man who understood that sometimes the best help was simply letting someone be. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the tracks they'd made, making everything new and clean. She closed her eyes, poker within reach but not in hand, and finally, as dawn crept toward the mountains, she slept. Spring came reluctant to the mountains, fighting winter for every inch of ground. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and mud, then covered it again with late storms that seemed spiteful in their timing. Lainey woke that morning to sunlight, real sunlight, not the weak gray that had passed for it these past weeks. It streamed through her window, highlighting dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. She'd been here near a month now, long enough that the cabin felt less like shelter and more like something else she didn't have words for yet. Coffee first, always coffee. She'd learned to make it strong enough to stand a spoon in, the way Silas liked it, though she couldn't fathom how anyone drank it that way. Her own cup she watered down, added a precious bit of sugar from the supply he'd brought her last week. "You don't have to scrimp," he'd said when she'd protested the extravagance. "Sugar's not so dear that you should drink bitter coffee." But old habits died hard, and she still measured each spoonful like it might be the last. Through the window, she could see him already at work, mending the corral fence. The warm spell had the horses frisky, and yesterday the bay gelding had kicked through 2 rails in his enthusiasm for spring. Silas moved with the easy rhythm of someone who'd done such work 1,000 times measure. Cut, fit, nail. No wasted motion, no hurry. She watched longer than she meant to, coffee cooling in her hands. There was something settling about watching him work, something that made the tight place between her shoulders ease just a little. A knock at her door made her jump, coffee sloshing, but it was just the familiar pattern 2 raps. Pause. 1 more. His way of announcing himself without startling her. She'd never asked him to do it that way, but somehow he'd known. "Come in," she called, setting down her cup. He entered, bringing the smell of sawdust and morning air. "Thought you might want to know. Supply wagon's coming through today, if you need anything from town." Town. The word sat heavy in her stomach. She'd managed to avoid it so far, sending lists with Silas when he went for supplies. But "I could use some thread," she said carefully, "and maybe some calico, if it's not too dear. The shirts I've been mending are more patch than shirt now." He nodded, then seemed to consider something. "You could come along, if you wanted. See what they have yourself." The coffee cup trembled slightly in her hands. Town meant people, questions, eyes that would catalog her presence and draw conclusions. "I don't think—" "Martha's been asking after you," he said, casual as if discussing weather. "Says any woman who can survive a month in my employ deserves a medal, or at least a friendly face." Despite everything, she almost smiled. She said that, among other things, most of them unflattering to me. He shifted his weight, and she realized he was nervous. Silas McCrae, who faced down storms and spooked horses without flinching, was nervous about asking her to town. "You don't have to. Just thought, well, you've been cooped up here a while." Cooped up. like she was a chicken in a henhouse instead of a woman in hiding. But maybe that's all she'd become, a fearful thing, pecking at the same safe ground, afraid of hawks that might or might not be circling. "All right," she heard herself say. "I'll come." His eyebrows rose slightly, the most surprise she'd ever seen him show. "Good. That's good. Wagon leaves in an hour." After he left, she stood before her small mirror, trying to make herself presentable. Her hair had grown some, less severe in its pinning. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out from regular meals. She looked less like a ghost and more like a woman who might have legitimate business in town. The dress was still the same worn blue, but cleaned and mended so many times it had taken on a softness that was almost elegant in its simplicity. She pinned her mother's brooch at the collar, the one thing of value she'd kept through everything. It caught the light, a small defiance against the plainness of the rest. The ride to town took 2 hours, the wagon jolting over roads still rough from winter. Silas handled the team with his usual quiet competence, pointing out landmarks where lightning had split an ancient pine, where the creek would flood come full snowmelt, where he'd once found a bear denning with cubs. "You talk more when you're nervous," she observed after his third story about the local wildlife. He gave her a sideways look. "Who says I'm nervous?" "The horses. You're holding the reins tighter than usual." He consciously relaxed his grip. "Don't want you to think. People talk, in town, about everything and everyone. Just want you to be prepared." "For what? The scandal of a woman working for wages?" She kept her tone light, but understood what he wasn't saying. A woman alone, living on a man's property, even in separate quarters. Yes, people would talk. "They don't know you," he said. "Don't know the situation. Some folks, they jump to conclusions like it's a paying job." "Let them." The words came out fiercer than intended. "I've survived worse than gossip." He nodded, and she caught what might have been approval in his expression. "That's the spirit. Besides, Martha will set anyone straight who needs setting." The town appeared around a bend, looking exactly as she remembered weathered buildings huddled against the vastness of sky and mountain. The supply wagon sat outside the general store, men already unloading barrels and crates. A few women clustered near the milliner's shop, their voices carrying like birdsong. Silas helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady under her elbow until her feet found ground. "I'll be at the feed store," he said. "Take your time." She entered the general store like diving into cold water quick, before courage failed. The familiar smells hit her leather and coffee and pickles in brine. Jonas Hartwell looked up from his ledger, recognition flickering across his face. "Mrs. Rowe, heard you were staying out at the McCrae place." "Miss Rowe?" she corrected quietly. "And yes, I'm working there." Something in her tone must have warned him off further questions. He simply nodded. "What can I help you with?" She produced her list, tried to ignore the way conversation stopped when she passed. Let them look, let them wonder. She'd faced down worse than curious eyes. At the fabric counter, she fingered bolts of calico, calculating cost against need. The prices seemed dear after so long away from such things. "That blue would suit you." She turned to find Martha approaching, solid and steady as a mountain. The older woman's face held curiosity but no judgment. "Mrs. Carter." Laney managed a smile. "It's good to see you." "Just Martha is fine, and it's better to see you. You look well, fed at least, which is more than I expected given that Silas McCrae thinks coffee and jerky constitute a meal. He's been very fair, very proper." "Course he has. Man doesn't know how to be otherwise." Martha fingered the fabric Laney had been considering. "This blue's nice, but overpriced. Come with me." She led Laney to a back corner where bolts of fabric sat slightly dusty. "Last season's patterns. Jonas'll sell them half price rather than ship them back. This green here that'd make up nice." It was a sage green, subtle but pretty. Laney touched it carefully, already seeing how it would look made into a proper dress. something that wasn't worn thin from too much washing, too much wearing. "Thank you," she said softly. Martha waved off the gratitude. "Women need to look out for each other out here. Not enough of us to do otherwise." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "Silas is a good man, stubborn as a mule and about as talkative, but good. You're safe there." "I know." The words came out before Lainey could stop them. And she realized it was true. Somewhere in the last month, between locked doors and careful distances, she'd started to believe in safety again. Martha nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, let's see about getting you a fair price on that fabric." They haggled Jonas down to a price that was almost reasonable, Martha wielding her tongue like a weapon honed by years of practice. Lainey found herself actually enjoying it. This normal thing, this ordinary interaction between women who understood the value of pennies saved. Outside, she nearly collided with a man coming through the door. He stepped back, tipping his hat automatically, then froze. Something in his eyes' recognition calculation made her stomach drop. "Pardon me, miss," he said, but his gaze lingered too long, took in too much. She pushed past him, heart hammering. Had he known Thomas? Was he from Wyoming, or was she just seeing threats where none existed? Martha noticed her distress. "You all right?" "Yes, I should find Mr. McCrae. He'll be at Henderson's, likely arguing about grain prices." Martha studied her with eyes that saw too much. "That fellow bothering you?" Lainey glanced back. The man had disappeared into the store. "No, it's nothing." But her hands shook as she walked toward the feed store, and every face on the street suddenly seemed familiar, dangerous. This was why she'd stayed away. Too many eyes, too many questions, too many possibilities for recognition. She found Silas deep in conversation with Henderson about oat prices. He looked up at her entrance, and whatever he saw in her face ended his negotiations quick. "Got what you need?" he asked, taking her parcels without comment. "Yes, I'm ready to go back." He nodded, made their farewells without hurry but without delay either. Not until they were in the wagon, town falling behind them, did he speak again. "What happened?" "Nothing. Maybe nothing?" She twisted her hands in her lap. "There was a man. He looked at me like, I don't know, like he knew me, or thought he did." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "You recognize him?" "No, but that doesn't mean anything. Thomas had friends, business partners, people who might—" She stopped, realizing she'd said more than intended. "Wyoming's a long way from here," Silas said carefully. "And men who looked too long at women usually got their own reasons, none of them worth worrying about." She wanted to believe him, but the feeling persisted, like a pebble in her shoe, small but impossible to ignore. They rode in silence for a while, the mountains rising around them like walls. Safe walls, she'd thought, but walls could trap as easy as protect. "I shouldn't have come," she said finally. "You can't hide forever." The words stung because they were true. "Watch me." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Hiding's not living. Lainey, it's just waiting to die slower." "And you'd know about that?" "More than I'd like." He adjusted the reins, eyes on the road ahead. "Spent 5 years after the war doing exactly that, hiding from what I'd done, what I'd seen, building walls instead of bridges. Then I realized the only person I was punishing was myself." "It's not the same." "No, but the result is—" He glanced at her, quick and sharp. "You're not the only person in this territory with things they'd rather forget. Difference is, most of us learn to live with our ghosts instead of for them." The words hit like cold water. She wanted to be angry, but couldn't quite manage it. Because he was right. She'd been living for her ghosts, letting them dictate every choice, every movement. "That man in town," she said slowly. "He might be nobody, probably is nobody. Probably. But if he's not, then we'll deal with it." He said it simple, like it was already decided. You're not alone out here, Lainey. Not unless you choose to be. The word we hung in the air between them, fragile as spring ice. She didn't acknowledge it, couldn't, but something in her chest eased slightly, like a fist unclenching just a little. They reached the ranch as afternoon shadows grew long. He helped her down, handed her the parcels. His hands lingered on the packages just a moment, and she realized he was giving her time to say whatever needed saying. "Thank you," she managed. "For today, for understanding." He touched his hat brim. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we're moving the herd to the upper pasture. Could use your help with the horses if you're willing." "I'm willing." She walked to her cabin, aware of him watching until she was safe inside. The lock turned easy under her hand, but for the first time, it felt less like necessity and more like choice. Through her window, she watched him head to the barn, steady and sure. A good man. Martha had said, safe. Maybe that was enough. Maybe safety was its own kind of freedom, and trust was just another word for choosing which doors to lock and which to leave open. She hung her mother's brooch carefully on its hook, started water for tea. Tomorrow there would be workhorses and cattle and the endless rhythm of ranch life. But tonight, she had fabric for a new dress and the memory of normal conversation and the strange, tentative feeling that might have been hope. The man from town worried at the edges of her mind, but she pushed the worry aside. Silas was right, Wyoming was far away, and she was tired of running from shadows. Outside, evening painted the mountains purple and gold. Inside, she lit her lamp and spread the green fabric on the table, already seeing the dress it would become. Something new. Something that wasn't tied to before or elsewhere. Something that belonged to this place, this life she was carefully, fearfully, hopefully building. One stitch at a time, one day at a time. One locked door and one trusted face at a time. The whispers started small, like smoke seeping under doors. First at the general store, then at Sunday service. Spreading through town like wildfire looking for dry grass to consume. That woman at the McCrae place heard she's running from something. Husband up in Wyoming, they say dead under mysterious circumstances. No decent woman lives alone on a man's property, lock or no lock. Lainey felt the weight of their stares when she ventured to town for supplies. Conversations stopped when she entered shops, started again when she left. She kept her head high, her business brief, but each trip left her feeling raw as winter wind. It was early May when everything changed. She'd gone to town alone. Silas was helping a neighbor with calving trouble. The day was warm. Spring finally winning its battle against winter's memory. She'd worn the new green dress, sewn by lamplight over many evenings, and felt almost like a normal woman doing normal errands. The general store was busy, full of ranchers' wives stocking up. Lainey moved through them like a ghost, gathering what she needed, trying to remain invisible. She was reaching for a tin of baking powder when a hand closed around her arm. Well, Mrs. Thomas Rowe." The voice froze her blood. She turned slowly, already knowing who she'd find. Jake Morrison, Thomas's drinking companion, business partner, and witness to too many ugly scenes. His grip tightened, fingers pressing into flesh with practiced cruelty. "Jake!" Her voice came out steady somehow. "You're far from Wyoming." "So are you." His eyes, bloodshot and mean, traveled over her. "Tommy always said you'd rabbit on him someday. Guess he was right. I let go of my arm. In a minute. See, Tommy owed me money when he passed, substantial money. And since you inherited everything he had, that debt passes to you. He had nothing. You know that. Had you," his smile showed teeth like old ivory. "Still does, way I see it. Marriage don't end just 'cause you run off." People were staring now, backing away from the confrontation but not intervening. Small-town people knew better than to insert themselves in other folks' troubles. Thomas is dead, she said quietly. The marriage ended with him. Funny thing about that. Jake leaned closer, breath sour with tobacco and whiskey. Nobody seems to know exactly how old Tommy died. You disappeared so quick, didn't even stay for a proper burial? Makes a man wonder. Her free hand found the counter, gripping hard to stop the trembling. Wonder all you like, but let go of my arm. Or what you'll brain me with a skillet, too. The words hit like a physical blow. He knew, somehow. He knew, or guessed. Or maybe Thomas had told him about the other times, the close calls, the threats she'd made when cornered. They're a problem here. The voice cut through the tension like a knife. Silas stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking mild as milk. But Laney had seen him gentle spooked horses and knew the kind of strength that lived in that deceptive calm. Jake's grip loosened, but didn't release. No problem. Just catching up with an old friend. Mrs. Rowe and I go way back. Miss Rowe, Silas corrected, stepping closer. And I believe she asked you to let go. This ain't your business, Cowboy. Well now, that's where you're wrong. Silas's voice stayed conversational, but something in his stance shifted. Miss Rowe works for me. That makes her welfare my business. So I'll ask you polite, just once, to take your hand off her. Jake looked between them, calculating. The store had gone dead quiet. Everyone watching. Waiting. Finally. He released Laney's arm with a little shove that made her stumble. We're not done, he told her. Tommy's debt don't disappear just 'cause you did. Then you best take that up with Tommy, Silas said. Man wants his debts paid. He should have stayed alive to collect them. Jake's face flushed ugly red. You don't know who you're protecting. What she is, what she done. I know she works hard and minds her business, which is more than I can say for some. Silas moved to Laney's side, not touching but close enough she could feel the solid presence of him. I also know the sheriff takes a dim view of men who harass women in his town. You planning on staying long? It was a clear threat, delivered mild as asking about weather. Jake's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. This ain't over, he said finally, stabbing a finger at Laney. Tommy had friends, had family. They'll want to know what really happened. Then they can ask the law in Wyoming. Silas replied. Meanwhile, you'd best move along. Jake left, shouldering past customers who scattered like chickens. The bell above the door jangled angry as he stormed out. Laney stood frozen, aware of every eye in the store, aware of her arm throbbing where Jake had gripped it, aware of how close she'd come to losing everything she'd built here. Come on, Silas said quietly. Let's get you home. She let him guide her out, past the staring faces and whispered speculations. Her packages sat forgotten on the counter. Someone would save them. Or not. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting away from those eyes, those whispers that would grow into shouts by sundown. In the wagon, she sat rigid as stone while Silas handled the team. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just drove while she tried to hold herself together with Will alone. He knew, she said finally, about Thomas, about how he died. Guessed, more likely, men like that, they're good at reading fear. The whole town heard, they'll all know now. They'll think what they want regardless. He glanced at her, quick and assessing. Question is, what are you planning to do about it? She laughed, short and bitter. Run! Again! Find somewhere else where nobody knows. That what you want? The question stopped her cold. What did she want for so long? All she'd wanted was safety, anonymity, a place to rest without looking over her shoulder. But now she had work she took pride in, a cabin that felt like home, horses that whickered when they heard her step, and this man beside her who'd stood between her and trouble without hesitation, without question. I don't know, she admitted. Then let me make it simple. He turned the wagon off the main road. onto the track that led home. You got a job here if you want it, a place to live. My protection, for whatever that's worth. That don't change based on what some liquored-up fool says in town. You don't know what I did. Don't need to. I killed him. The words came out flat, matter of fact. With a skillet, he came at me drunk, mean, ready to... She stopped, swallowed hard. It was him or me. I chose me. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then, good. She turned to stare at him. Good? Man raises his hand to a woman. He takes his chances. You defended yourself. Nothing wrong in that. The law might disagree. The law ain't always the same as justice. He pulled the wagon up before her cabin. You did what you had to. Now you got to decide keep running from it, or plant your feet and face whatever comes. She climbed down from the wagon, stood looking at her cabin, her refuge, her cage, her choice. He'll be back, she said. Or he'll send others. Jake doesn't give up when he thinks he's owed something. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. There it was again, we. Such a small word to carry such weight. Why? She turned to face him fully. Why does my trouble matter to you? He considered the question, really considered it. Maybe because I know what it's like to need someone to stand with you. Maybe because you're a good hand with the horses. Or maybe... He paused, seemed to choose his words careful. Maybe because for the first time in years, this place feels less empty with you here. The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Lainey felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of bonds she hadn't realized were there. I need to think, she said. Take your time. He climbed back into the wagon. But Lainey, whatever you decide, you don't have to face it alone. Not anymore. She watched him drive away, then went inside. The cabin felt different somehow. Smaller, or maybe she'd gotten bigger, grown beyond its walls without noticing. Through the window, she could see the main house, the barn, the corrals, the life she'd built here stick by stick, day by day. Was she really going to let Jake Morrison take that from her? Let fear drive her back into running? She thought about Thomas, about the years of walking on eggshells, of gauging his moods, of taking what he dealt out because the law said he owned her. Thought about that last night, the rage in his eyes, the way the skillet felt in her hand, heavy with desperation and finality both. She'd chosen herself then, chosen to live. Maybe it was time to make that choice again. That evening, when Silas knocked his familiar pattern, she opened the door wide. I'm staying, she said without preamble. If Jake comes back, if there's trouble, I'm staying. Something eased in his face. Good, that's good. But I need to tell you everything. About Thomas, about what happened. If you're standing with me, you should know what you're standing for. He removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair. If you need to tell it, I'll listen, but it won't change anything. Not for me. So she told him, standing in her doorway with spring evening falling soft around them. She told the whole ugly truth, the courtship that turned to possession, the marriage that became a prison, the escalating violence, the isolation, the final terrible night when survival meant becoming something she'd never wanted to be. He listened without interrupting, without judgment. When she finished, wrung out and empty, he was quiet for a long moment. You survived, he said finally. That's what matters. You survived, and you got free, and you made it here. Rest is just noise. She felt tears threaten for the first time in months. The law? The law in Wyoming can ask their questions there. This is Colorado, my land, my rules. He settled his hat back on his head. Anyone wants to make trouble for you, they go through me first. That's how it is. The tears did come then, silent and healing. She didn't try to stop them. Thank you, she whispered. He touched his hat brim, that gesture she'd come to treasure. Get some rest. Tomorrow we got work to do. Ranch doesn't run itself, no matter what troubles come calling. She watched him walk away, then closed the door. Not locked this time. For the first time since she'd arrived. She left it unlocked, because sometimes trust meant knowing you could lock the door, and sometimes it meant choosing not to. Outside, night settled over the mountains. But inside, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Lainey Rowe felt something that might have been peace, or hope, or just the simple, powerful knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. Tomorrow there would be challenges. Jake Morrison would make trouble. She had no doubt. The town would talk. The past would reach for her with grasping fingers. But tonight, she had a home, work that mattered, a man who stood with her without asking for anything in return. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The ranch hands arrived with the late spring warmth, 5 men hired for the summer work of moving cattle, mending fences, and all the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. Lainey watched them ride in from her window, dusty and trail-worn, their voices carrying across the yard. She'd known they were coming. Silas had warned her, offered to release her from their arrangement until the men moved on come fall. She'd refused. This was her work, her place. She wouldn't hide from it. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the noon meal. 5 strangers meant 5 sets of eyes, 5 possible connections to her past, 5 chances for recognition or trouble. But it also meant proving herself useful, valuable, worth protecting. She set up the long table in the main house kitchen. Silas had given her free run of it for cooking when the hands were around. The men would sleep in the bunkhouse, but meals were taken here, where the big stove and proper kitchen made feeding a crew possible. "Smells good in here." She turned to find Silas in the doorway, hat in hand. Behind him, she could hear the men washing up at the pump. "Beef stew and biscuits," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Coffee's ready." "They'll appreciate it. Been living on trail food for a week." He paused, studying her. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure." The men filed in, rough-looking but respectful, removing their hats, murmuring thanks as she served them. She kept her eyes down, movements efficient, playing the part of hired help rather than whatever else she might be to this place. "Boys, this is Miss Rowe," Silas said, taking his place at the head of the table. "She's been helping with the household work. You treat her with respect, or you'll answer to me." A chorus of "yes, sir" and "ma'am" followed. She risked a glance at them weathered faces, work-hardened hands, the look of men who'd learned to judge character quick because their lives might depend on it. One of them, younger than the rest, with sandy hair and an easy smile, caught her eye. "This is fine cooking, ma'am. Been a dog's age since we had proper biscuits." "Thank you," she managed, refilling coffee cups. The meal passed without incident. The men talked cattle and weather, complained good-naturedly about the work ahead, told stories that grew taller with each telling. Normal ranch hand conversation. She began to relax fractionally. Over the following days, she fell into a routine. Up before dawn to start breakfast, noon meal served prompt, supper ready when they came in dusty and tired. In between, she mended torn shirts, darned socks, kept the kitchen running smooth. The men were respectful, even kind. They brought her wildflowers picked during their rides, competed to see who could make her smile with their tall tales, offered to help with heavy lifting, all except one. Cole Garrett was older than the others, with dark eyes that watched everything and said little. He'd stare at her when he thought she wasn't looking, a calculating gaze that made her skin crawl. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. It was a week into their stay when she found out why. She was alone in the kitchen, kneading bread for the next day, when he appeared in the doorway. No knock, no announcement. Just suddenly there, blocking the light. "Help you with something." She kept her voice steady, hands still working the dough. "Maybe." He stepped inside, too close. "Been trying to place you, know you from somewhere." "I don't think so." Sure I do. He moved closer still. Wyoming, year or so back, you were Thomas Rowe's woman. Her hand stilled. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. His smile was unpleasant. Worked a drive with Rowe once. He talked about his pretty wife. Dark hair, tall for a woman, good cook. Said you had a temper on you, though. Said he had to keep you in line. You're mistaken. Am I? He reached out, fingered the edge of her apron. Funny thing, Rowe turning up dead like that, his wife vanishing, makes a man wonder. She stepped back, bumped into the table. I think you should leave. In a minute. See, I'm wondering if Silas knows what he's harboring here. Man like him, straight as they come, might not take kindly to keeping a woman who murdered her husband. I didn't. Didn't you? He pressed closer. Jake Morrison thinks you did. Came through here last week, asking questions. Said he'd pay good money for information about Laney Rowe. Her mind raced. Jake had been here, looking for her, offering rewards. How long before someone decided she was worth more as bounty than as cook? What do you want? The question came out bitter. Well now, that depends. His eyes traveled over her, lingering. Could be I forget where I know you from. Could be I never heard of Thomas Rowe or his runaway wife. Man's memory can be flexible, given the right encouragement. She understood then. Not money he wanted, but something else. Something that made her stomach turn and her hands clench. Get out! Her voice came low, dangerous. Get out before I scream this house down! Who'd believe you, woman, with your past, your reputation? I would. The voice cracked like a whip from the doorway. Silas stood there, and the look on his face made Cole step back quick. Mr. McCrae, just having a conversation with the lady. Conversation's over. Silas moved into the room, positioning himself between Laney and Cole. Pack your gear. Draw your wages. You're done here. Now hold on. You held on too long already. Silas's voice was deadly quiet. Man who threatens women under my roof doesn't stay under my roof. You've got 10 minutes before I help you leave. And trust me, you don't want my help. Cole's face flushed ugly. You don't know what she is, what she done. I know what you are, what you just tried to do. That's enough. For a moment, violence crackled in the air. Then Cole spat on the floor, turned on his heel. This ain't over. Jake Morrison's still looking, still paying. Someone'll collect. After he left, Silas turned to Laney. She stood pressed against the table, arms wrapped around herself, trying not to shake. Did he hurt you? No, just threatened. She forced herself to straighten. I'm sorry. This is what I brought to your door. Trouble and more trouble. Cole Garrett brought his own trouble. He moved to the stove, poured coffee with steady hands. Should have seen it sooner. Man had a bad feel from the start. He'll talk. Tell the others. Tell everyone. Let him. Silas handed her a cup. Drink this. You're white as paper. She took the cup, noticed her hands were shaking. The coffee was too hot, too strong, but the burn felt real and present. I should go, before this gets worse. We've had this conversation. He leaned against the counter, watching her. You running won't solve anything. Just gives men like Morrison and Garrett more power. Staying might get you killed. Might not. He shrugged, casual as discussing weather. Been in worse spots with worse odds. This isn't your fight. It is now. Something in his tone made her look up. His eyes held that steady certainty she'd come to depend on. Made it mine when I offered you shelter. Confirmed it when I stood with you in town. This is my land, my rules. Nobody threatens people under my protection. Nobody. The words undid something in her. She set the cup down before she dropped it, covered her face with her hands. Not crying, just overwhelmed. When did she last have someone stand for her? When did anyone ever put themselves between her and harm without wanting payment? Hey now. His voice came soft. None of that. You're stronger than this. Am I? She dropped her hands. I've brought nothing but trouble. Jake Morrison, now Cole, soon others. How long before? A knock interrupted. The young, sandy-haired hand Will, she remembered, stood in the doorway looking troubled. Boss, the boys are asking what's going on. Cole's packing, cursing up a storm. Says Miss Laney's got a bounty on her head. Silas straightened. Gather the men. Main room, now. Will disappeared. Silas turned to Laney. You don't have to be there for this. Yes, I do. She untied her apron, smoothed her hair. If they're going to judge me, they should hear it from me. The men gathered, confused and wary. Cole's absence felt loud in the room. Silas stood by the fireplace, Laney beside him, chin up despite the tremor in her hands. Here's the situation. Silas began. Miss Rowe had trouble in Wyoming. Left a bad situation that ended with a man dead. Man who deserved it, from what I know. She came here looking for honest work and peace. I gave her both. Murmurs from the men. Laney stepped forward. My husband was a cruel man, she said simply. He hurt me, often and badly. One night, he came at me worse than before. I defended myself. He died. I ran. She looked at each man in turn. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not sorry either. I chose to live. Silence stretched taut. Then Will spoke up. Begging pardon, ma'am, but seems to me a man who raises hands to a woman gets what's coming. Agreed, said another. My PA taught me a man who hits women ain't no man at all. The oldest hand, a grizzled veteran named Frank, studied her with knowing eyes. This bounty Cole mentioned, how much? I don't know, Laney admitted. Jake Morrison, my husband's friend, thinks I owe him money. He's using that as excuse to hunt me. Frank spat into the fireplace. Morrison, know that name. Snake of a man. Runs with worse snakes. He looked at Silas. This'll bring trouble. Boss, real trouble. I know, Silas said. Any man wants to ride out. No hard feelings. Pay what you're owed. No questions asked. The men exchanged glances. Will grinned suddenly. Well, hell, boss. Season was looking to be boring anyway. Might as well have some excitement. Boy's right, Frank agreed. Been too long since I had a good scrap. Besides, Miss Laney makes better biscuits than Cookie ever did. Be ashamed to lose those. One by one, the others nodded agreement. They'd stay. They'd stand. These men who owed her nothing would risk themselves for principle and biscuits, and the simple fact that she was one of theirs now. Laney felt her throat close with emotion. Thank you, all of you. Thank you. All right, then. Silas's voice turned businesslike. We post watches. Nobody rides alone. Strangers get questioned before they get close. Frank, you know Morrison's type. What are we facing? As the men discussed tactics and preparations, Laney slipped out. The evening air felt cool on her flushed face. She stood on the porch, looking out at the land that had become home, feeling the weight of what these people were willing to risk for her. You all right? She hadn't heard Silas approach. He stood beside her, careful distance between them as always. They don't even know me, she said. Why would they? Because they know right from wrong. Because they've ridden for me long enough to trust my judgment. Because you've fed them good meals and mended their clothes and shown them kindness. He paused. Because some things are worth standing for. She turned to look at him. In the fading light, his face showed all the weathering of a hard life, but his eyes were kind, always kind, even when being stern. I never thanked you properly, she said, for that first night, for the cabin, the lock, the chance, for all of it. I don't want thanks. What do you want? The question hung between them. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Want you to feel safe, he said finally. Want you to have a life without looking over your shoulder. Want... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter what I want. What matters is keeping you protected until this Morrison gives up or gets dealt with." She heard what he didn't say, felt it in the space between words, the careful distance he maintained, the way he looked at her when he thought she didn't notice. "Silas, better get supper finished." He cut her off gently. "Men'll be hungry after all this excitement." She nodded, understanding. Not now, not with trouble coming, not with her freedom still balanced on a knife's edge. But someday, maybe when the past finally let her go. She went back to the kitchen, back to the bread that needed baking, but her hands were steadier now, her spine straighter. She had protection, she had purpose, she had people willing to fight for her right to both. Cole Garrett could talk, Jake Morrison could threaten. The past could reach for her with grasping fingers. But she wasn't alone anymore, and that, she was beginning to understand, made all the difference in the world. The storm came out of nowhere. As mountain storms do, one moment the evening was clear, stars beginning to show. The next, black clouds boiled over the peaks like God's own fury unleashed. Lainey had just finished cleaning the supper dishes when the first lightning split the sky. Thunder followed immediate, so loud it shook the windows. She'd never liked storms, too much raw power, too much reminder of forces beyond control. The ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse, taking their rotating watches seriously since Cole's departure a week ago. No sign of Jake Morrison yet, but everyone stayed alert. The waiting was its own kind of torment. Another crack of lightning, closer this time. The lamp flickered. Rain began, not gentle but driving, hammering the roof like fists. She should go back to her cabin, but the thought of crossing the yard in this weather. Getting worse out there. She jumped, turned to find Silas in the kitchen doorway. He'd been checking the horses, making sure they were secured. Water dripped from his hat, pooled around his boots. "I should go," she said, though her voice betrayed her reluctance. "Before it gets worse." Too late for that. As if to prove his point, lightning struck somewhere close, the flash and boom simultaneous. "Better wait it out here. I'll walk you back when it passes." She nodded, trying not to show her relief. The kitchen felt safer with its solid walls and warm stove, and with him here, steady as always. He hung his wet coat and hat by the door, accepted the coffee she offered. They stood awkwardly, the storm's violence making the kitchen feel smaller, more intimate. "Always hated storms," she admitted, flinching at another thunderclap. "They're just noise and water," he said, but not dismissively. "Though I remember being scared of them as a boy. My mother would tell me stories during storms, to distract me." "What kind of stories?" "Made-up tales mostly, about brave knights and rescued princesses." He smiled slightly at the memory. "I figured out later she was just as frightened as I was, but she never let it show." Lainey thought about that, a scared woman comforting a scared child, both pretending bravery they didn't feel. How much of life was that kind of pretense? The lights went out suddenly, plunging them into darkness. She gasped, stepped backward, bumped into him. His hand caught her elbow, steadying. "Just the lamp," he said calmly. "I've got matches." But another flash of lightning illuminated the room, showing rain driving horizontal past the windows. In that brief, stark light, she saw his face concerned, protective, closer than usual. "I'm all right," she said, though she wasn't. The dark pressed in, bringing memories of other nights, other storms, other times when weather had trapped her with someone she feared. "Here," he guided her to a chair, his touch careful but sure. "Sit, I'll get the lamp lit." She heard him moving in the dark, the scrape of a match. Warm light bloomed, pushing back the shadows. He adjusted the wick, set the lamp on the table where it cast a golden circle of safety. "Better?" "Yes, thank you." She wrapped her arms around herself. Cold, despite the warm kitchen. "I'm sorry. I'm not usually so Thunder crashed overhead, violent enough to rattle dishes. She cried out, couldn't help it, hunched in the chair like she could make herself smaller, less of a target for the sky's rage. "Hey!" He was beside her suddenly, crouched so their eyes were level. "It's just a storm. You're safe here." "I know." But her body didn't know. Couldn't forget other storms, other violence. "It's just..." Thomas loved storms. Said they made him feel powerful. He'd get worked up during them. Restless, mean. She stopped, hating the tremor in her voice. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "That's not happening here." "I know," she said again, trying to believe it. Another lightning strike, terrifyingly close. The thunder was immediate, deafening. Without thinking, she reached for him, hands clutching his shirt. He went very still. "I'm sorry." She started to pull back, mortified. "Don't be." His arms came around her, careful and light, ready to release if she wanted. Nothing wrong with needing comfort in a storm. She should move away, should maintain the careful distance they'd established. But the storm raged outside, and memories raged inside, and his embrace felt like the only solid thing in a world gone wild. She let herself lean into him, just for a moment. He smelled of rain and leather and something uniquely him-safety. She realized. He smelled like safety. "My mother was afraid of storms," he said quietly. His voice a rumble she felt as much as heard. Never admitted it, but I could tell. She'd bake during storms. Said it was practical, using the oven heat, but I think she needed something to do with her hands. "What happened to her?" "Died when I was 15, lung fever. My father..." He paused. "He didn't handle it well. Started drinking, gambling, lost everything. I left soon after, figured I'd make my own way." She pulled back enough to see his face. "I'm sorry." Long time ago. But she saw the old pain there, weathered smooth but still present. "Point is, we all carry things, all have our storms, inside and out. Nothing to be ashamed of." Another flash of lightning, but this time she didn't flinch as badly. His arms tightened briefly, protective, then loosened as the thunder rolled away. "I should..." She didn't finish, didn't move. "Storm's still bad," he said. "No rush." They stayed like that, her hands still fisted in his shirt, his arms careful around her. The lamp flickered, casting moving shadows. Rain hammered the roof, but it seemed more distant now, less threatening. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why did you offer me the cabin that first night, really?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You looked tired. Not just body tired, but soul tired, like you'd been carrying something too heavy for too long." He shifted slightly. "I recognized that look, saw it in my own mirror for years. And now?" "Now I see someone fighting to build a new life, someone brave enough to stay and face what comes instead of keep running." His hand moved slightly on her back, just a small shift, but she felt it everywhere. "Someone who makes this place feel less empty." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Not yet, not with Jake Morrison still out there, still hunting, not with her freedom still so fragile. But want lived in the space between their bodies, in the careful way he held her, in the way she couldn't quite let go. Thunder rumbled, more distant now. The storm was passing, moving on to trouble other valleys, but neither of them moved. "Laney!" I know. She did know. Knew all the reasons this was complicated, dangerous, unwise. "Just, not yet, please. Just let me, just for tonight. Can we pretend the storm is still too bad, that I can't go back to my cabin, that we're just two people who..." "Who what?" She lifted her head, met his eyes. "Who might have chosen each other, if the world was different, if we were different?" Something shifted in his face. "We don't need to be different. World doesn't need to be different. We just need time." "Time for what?" "For you to trust this, to trust me, to believe you're safe enough to want something more than just shelter. She laughed, soft and sad. What if I don't remember how to want? What if Thomas broke that part of me? He didn't. His voice held such certainty. I see it in how you gentle the horses, how you hum when you're cooking and think no one's listening, how you smiled last week when Will brought you those wildflowers. His thumb moved against her back, the smallest caress. You're not broken, Lainey. Just careful. Nothing wrong with careful. The wind still howled, but the lightning had moved on. Rain fell steady now. Normal rain, without the violence of the storm's height. She should go, should step away from this embrace that promised complications she couldn't afford. Instead, she said, "Tell me about the ranch, about your plans for it." So he did, still holding her, still pretending the storm trapped them. He talked about breeding programs and grazing rotations and his hope to buy the adjacent valley. Normal talk, safe talk, the kind of conversation two people might have if their pasts didn't loom like shadows and their future wasn't uncertain as mountain weather. I'd like to see that, she said when he described his vision for the place. The ranch grown bigger, successful. You will, he said simply, like her staying was already decided. Like Jake Morrison and bounties and the weight of a dead husband were just temporary obstacles. Maybe he was right. Maybe survival was just choosing to stay, day after day, until staying became living. The rain gentled to a drizzle. No excuse now to remain in this careful embrace. She pulled back slowly, his arms releasing her with obvious reluctance. I should go. I'll walk you. They crossed the yard in silence, picking their way around puddles. The air smelled clean and sharp, washed free of dust. At her cabin door, she turned to face him. Thank you for understanding. About the storm. Nothing to thank me for. He touched his hat brim. Lock your door, Lainey. Not because you need to anymore, just because you can. She watched him walk away, then went inside. The cabin felt smaller somehow, lonelier. She could still smell rain and leather, still feel the careful strength of his arms. At the window, she watched his lamp-lit form reach the main house, watched him pause at his door, look back toward her cabin, raised her hand, though he couldn't see her in the dark. He went inside. She turned from the window, began preparing for bed, but her mind kept circling back to those moments in the kitchen, to want acknowledged but not acted on, to promises made by careful silence. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving clear skies and glittering stars. But inside, another kind of storm was building slower, deeper, more dangerous than any lightning. She touched the door's lock but didn't turn it. Not tonight. Tonight she'd leave it open to possibility, to trust, to the fragile hope that maybe, when the shadows of the past finally lifted, there might be something bright waiting on the other side. The ranch was quiet, except for the drip of water from the eaves and the distant sound of horses settling after the storm. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, a harmonica played soft and low, one of the hands unable to sleep, making music against the dark. Lainey lay in her narrow bed, listening, remembering the solid warmth of Silas's embrace, the certainty in his voice when he said she wasn't broken. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was just careful. Maybe careful was smart until the world proved it was safe to be otherwise. But tonight, with the storm past and the door unlocked and the memory of understanding in his eyes, careful felt less like wisdom and more like another kind of cage, one she'd built herself, one she was beginning to think she might, someday, be brave enough to leave. Morning came soft and golden, the storm having washed the world clean. Lainey stood on her cabin's small porch, breathing air that tasted new. The mountains stood sharp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Everything sparkled with leftover rain. She'd slept little after the storm. After those moments in Silas's arms, her mind kept circling back to his words, his careful touch, the way he'd held her like something precious but not fragile, the way he'd let her go when the storm passed. understanding her need for time even as want lived in his eyes. Now, watching him work with the horses in the corral, she felt that want echo in her own chest. Dangerous feeling, complicated feeling, but real as the morning sun on her face. "Miss Laney." Will's voice broke her reverie. The young hand came jogging up, grinning wide. "Morning, Will." "Morning, ma'am. Boss wanted me to tell you we're moving the herd to the north pasture today. He said you might want to ride along, help with the horses." Ride along, out in the open, away from the safety of the ranch buildings. Part of her wanted to refuse, to stay in her known, safe routine. But another part, the part that was tired of fear ruling her choices, spoke up. "I'll need to borrow a horse." Will's grin widened. "Boss already thought of that. Said to saddle Buttercup for you. She's gentle as they come." An hour later, Laney sat atop Buttercup, trying to remember the last time she'd been on horseback. Ohio, maybe, before marriage narrowed her world to house and kitchen. The mare stood patient while she found her balance, adjusted to the strange feeling of height and movement. "Looking good up there," Silas said, riding over on his big bay. He sat his horse like he'd been born to it, easy and natural. "Remember to relax. Buttercup knows her business." The other hands were already moving the cattle, their whistles and calls carrying on the clean air. Dust rose despite the recent rain, golden in the morning light. Laney watched, fascinated by the controlled chaos of it all. "Stay close," Silas instructed. "We'll skirt the edges. Keep the stragglers moving." They rode together, not talking much, focused on the work. But she felt his presence constant, protective without being obvious about it. When a stubborn heifer broke from the herd, he showed her how to angle Buttercup to turn it back. When they had to cross a stream still running high from rain, he went first, testing the depth. "You're doing well," he said during a brief rest. Natural seat for someone who hasn't ridden in years. "It's coming back." She patted Buttercup's neck, grateful for the mare's steady temperament. "I'd forgotten how much I loved this. The freedom of it." "Nothing like it," he agreed. "Out here, troubles seem smaller. World makes more sense." She understood what he meant. Out here, with endless sky above and mountains standing eternal, her fears did feel smaller. Jake Morrison seemed like a distant threat, not the looming shadow he'd become in her mind. They were moving through a cluster of pines when it happened. A rabbit burst from undergrowth, startling the cattle. They scattered, bawling, and suddenly the orderly drive became chaos. Buttercup, steady as she was, shied sideways. Laney grabbed for the saddle horn, managed to keep her seat, but her hat flew off, and her hair, hastily pinned that morning, came loose. It tumbled down her back, black as crow wings in the sunlight. "Whoa, easy," she soothed Buttercup, getting the mare under control. Around her, the hands worked to gather the scattered cattle, whistling and calling and laughing at the unexpected excitement. "You all right?" Silas appeared beside her, concern written plain. "Fine, just—" She gestured helplessly at her hair, trying to gather it back. "Lost my pins." "Leave it." The words came quiet, almost involuntary. She looked at him, found him staring at her with something new in his eyes. Not the careful restraint of recent weeks, but something rawer, more honest. "Silas." "You look—" He stopped, seemed to catch himself. "We should help with the cattle." But neither moved. The moment stretched between them, charged as the air before lightning. Her hair lifted in the breeze, and she saw his hand twitch like he wanted to touch it. "Boss could use some help over here." Frank's call broke the spell. Silas wheeled his horse around, rode toward the trouble without looking back. Laney sat frozen for a moment, heart hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with scattered cattle. They got the herd moving again, though it took effort. By the time they reached the north pasture, the sun stood high and hot. The hands were dust-covered and cheerful, ribbing each other about who'd handled the scatter worst. Miss Laney did better than you. Tom, Will called out. Kept her seat pretty as you please while you were hanging off your saddle like a sack of grain. Good-natured arguments followed. Laney found herself smiling. Included in their easy camaraderie, these men had accepted her, protected her, made her one of theirs. The realization warmed her more than the sun. They ate lunch by a stream, cold biscuits and dried beef tasting like a feast after the morning's work. Laney sat on a fallen log, trying to repin her hair with little success. Most of the pins were lost somewhere in the pine cluster. Here, Silas held out a leather cord. For your hair, if you want. She took it, their fingers brushing. Such a small touch to send such heat through her. Thank you. She tied her hair back simple, the way she'd worn it as a girl. It made her feel younger, freer, less like Thomas Rowe's widow and more like just Laney. Pretty as a picture, Will said, then blushed red when the other hands laughed. That is... Thank you, Will, she said gently, saving him from more embarrassment. The ride back was quieter. The cattle settled in their new pasture. Laney found herself riding beside Silas more often than not, drawn like a magnet to his steady presence. I've been thinking, she said as the ranch buildings came into view. About fear, about how I've let it rule me. She kept her eyes on the horizon. Jake Morrison might come. Might not, but I can't live my life waiting for shadows to take shape. What are you saying? She turned to look at him then. I'm saying I want to live. Really live. Not just survive. He studied her face, searching. And what does living look like to you? The question hung between them. She thought about the storm, about careful embraces and words unspoken, about want acknowledged but held in check. I don't know yet, she admitted. But I think it starts with being brave enough to find out. They reached the ranch as afternoon shadows grew long. The hands dispersed to various tasks, leaving Silas and Laney alone by the corral. He dismounted first, came to help her down. His hands at her waist were proper, correct, but they lingered just a moment too long. Thank you, she said, for today. For letting me ride along. You're always welcome. The men enjoyed having you there. And you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't take it back. Just waited, watching him process the shift in their careful dance. I enjoyed it, he said finally. More than I probably should. Why shouldn't you? You know why. His hands were still at her waist, neither of them moving to create proper distance. You're under my protection. You work for me. You're still married to a dead man, still running from his shadow. Her voice came fierce. I'm tired of being defined by what I was, by what was done to me. I want... She stopped, suddenly unsure. Want was one thing. Saying it out loud was another. What do you want? His voice dropped low. Private. Tell me. She looked up at him, this good man who'd given her shelter and time and space to heal, who'd stood between her and danger without hesitation, who held her now like she was something worth being careful with. I want to know what it's like, she said slowly, to choose something for myself, to want something and not be afraid of wanting it. His breath caught. Laney! I'm not asking for promises. Not asking for anything you're not willing to give. She lifted her hand, placed it flat against his chest, felt his heart beating fast and strong. I want to be brave enough to find out what this could be. When the time is right, when I'm free. He covered her hand with his, held it there against his heart. And until then, we be patient, we be careful, we be what we are now. But knowing there's more waiting when the world allows it. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb moving against her hand. Then he lifted it to his lips, pressed a kiss to her palm. Gentle, reverent, a promise without words. I'm a patient man, he said against her skin. "And you're worth waiting for." She swayed toward him, drawn by that simple touch. He could have kissed her then. She could see the want in his eyes, feel it in the tension of his body, but he stepped back, releasing her hand slow like it cost him. "Go on now," he said softly, "before I forget all my good intentions." She went, but at the porch of the main house, she turned back. He stood where she'd left him, watching her with eyes that held patience and promise and something deeper she didn't have words for yet. Silas. Yeah. Today, riding free like that. It's the first time since Ohio that I felt like myself. Thank you for that. Thank yourself, he said. You're the one who was brave enough to say yes. She smiled then, real and unguarded, and saw his breath catch at the sight. Then she went inside to start supper, humming under her breath, hair still tied back with his leather cord. Through the window, she watched him lead the horses to the barn, solid and steady, and hers not yet, not quite, but someday, when shadows stopped chasing, when the past loosened its grip, when she was free to want without fear. The sun set gold and glorious, painting the mountains in shades of fire. In the kitchen, Lainey worked with lighter hands, smiled more readily. The men noticed at supper, exchanging knowing looks but keeping their thoughts to themselves. After the meal, as she cleaned dishes, Will brought her a handful of hairpins. "Found these in the north pasture," he said, shy. "Thought you might want them back." She took them, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Will." But later, alone in her cabin, she set the pins aside and left her hair tied with Silas's cord. It felt like a claim, a connection, a promise of its own. Through her window, she could see a light in his window. Was he thinking of her? Of that moment by the corral? Of the future they'd agreed to wait for? She touched the leather cord, smiled at her own foolishness. Then she prepared for bed, leaving her door unlocked as had become her habit, not from fear now, but from trust, from the knowledge that some cages we build ourselves, and we alone hold the keys. Tomorrow Jake Morrison might come. Tomorrow might bring trouble and tests and hard choices. But tonight, she'd ridden free under endless sky. Tonight, she'd spoken her want aloud and hadn't been punished for it. Tonight, she'd seen her future reflected in a good man's eyes and hadn't run from what she saw there. It was enough, more than enough. It was the beginning of everything. The day Jake Morrison finally came, the sky was the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of rain. Lainey had been in the garden, tending the small patch of vegetables she'd coaxed from the stubborn soil, when she heard the horses, 3 riders, moving slow and deliberate down the road. Even from a distance, she recognized Jake's bulk in the lead. Her hands tightened on the hoe, but she didn't run. Those days were past. "Get inside," Frank called from his position by the barn. The other hands were already moving, casual-like but ready. She shook her head. "This is my fight." "Our fight," Silas corrected. Appearing from the house, he wore his gun belt, something he rarely did around the ranch. "But you don't face it alone." The riders stopped at the gate. Jake Morrison looked older, meaner, trail-worn and angry. The 2 men with him had the look of hired trouble, dead eyes, and ready guns. "Lainey Rowe," Jake called out. "Time to settle accounts." She walked forward, stopping beside Silas. Her chin was high, her voice steady. "Nothing to settle. Thomas is dead. Any debts died with him." "Not how I see it." Jake dismounted, his hand resting on his gun. "Way I figure, you owe me for taking away my partner, for running off with whatever he had hidden." He had nothing hidden, nothing but meanness and whiskey. "Liar." Jake's face flushed ugly. "Tommy told me about the money, said he was saving it for something big, then you killed him and ran with it." Lainey almost laughed at the absurdity. "Thomas couldn't save pennies without drinking them away. You knew him, Jake. You know that's true." "I know you're a murdering witch who needs to pay." Enough. Silas stepped forward slightly. You've said your piece. Now move along. This ain't your concern, McCrae. Made it my concern when I hired her, when she proved herself honest and hard-working. When men like you started sniffing around my property making threats. Jake's eyes narrowed. You sweet on her. Cowboy, that why you're protecting a killer? I'm protecting someone who defended herself against a brute. Man's got a right to protect his own. His own? Jake laughed. Ugly sound. She tell you how she done it, how she bashed Tommy's skull while he was sleeping, cold-blooded murder. That's what it was. That's a lie. Laney's voice came sharp. He came at me. He was drunk, violent, trying to... She stopped, swallowed. I defended myself. Sure you did. Jake turned to his men. Boys, I think it's time we collected what's owed. The air went tight as a drawn bowstring. Hands hovered near guns. But before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the tension. That's far enough. Sheriff Watson rode through the gate, badge glinting despite the gray day. Behind him came two deputies, rifles across their saddles. Sheriff, Jake said, trying for casual and missing. Just having a conversation. Conversation that involves 3 armed men on private property sounds more like a threat to me. Watson dismounted, took in the scene with lawman's eyes. Mr. Morrison, I believe you've been asked to leave. She's wanted in Wyoming. For murder. Maybe so. But this is Colorado. You want her arrested. You go through proper channels. Get a warrant. Present evidence. Watson moved between Jake and Laney. Subtle but clear. Until then, you're just another man making trouble on another man's land. Jake's jaw worked. This is wrong. She killed Tommy. She needs to pay. What I need, Watson said calmly, is for you to get on your horse and ride out. Now, before I arrest you for threatening behavior. The moment stretched taut. Jake's hired men looked between their employer and the deputy's rifles, making calculations. Finally, Jake spat in the dust. This ain't over. It is as far as Colorado's concerned, Watson replied. I see you in my jurisdiction again without proper papers. You'll be my guest in the jail. Understood. Jake mounted his horse with ill grace, but before riding off, he locked eyes with Laney. Tommy loved you, gave you everything, and you killed him for it. Something snapped in Laney. All the fear, all the careful silence, all the shame she'd carried like stones. Thomas Rowe never loved anything but himself, she said, voice carrying clear. He gave me bruises and broken ribs and worse. He gave me fear every day and terror every night. What I gave him was exactly what he earned. Jake's face went darker, but Watson's hand on his gun made the threat clear, with a final curse. Jake wheeled his horse and rode out, his men following. They watched until the riders disappeared over the rise. Only then did Watson relax slightly. Miss Rowe, might I have a word? Laney nodded, though her legs felt shaky now that danger had passed. Watson gestured for privacy, and they moved a few steps away. I know some of what happened in Wyoming, he said quietly. Made some inquiries after Morrison first came through. What I found was a woman with hospital records, doctor's notes about injuries, neighbors who heard things but were too scared to help. He studied her. Self-defense is what I'd call it. Wyoming might not agree. Wyoming's a long way off, and they haven't sent any official requests. He touched his hat. Far as I'm concerned, you're a citizen of Colorado now, entitled to protection like anyone else. Relief made her knees weak. Thank you. Thank Silas. He's the one who came to me, told me the situation, made it clear you were under his protection. Watson glanced toward where Silas stood. Good man to have in your corner. After Watson left, taking his calming authority with him, Laney stood in the yard feeling strangely empty. The confrontation she'd dreaded for months had come and gone, leaving her. What, free or just waiting for the next threat? You all right? Silas stood beside her, solid and real. I don't know, she admitted. I thought when this moment came, I'd feel different, resolved. Instead, I just feel tired. Yes, the word came out on a sigh. So tired. Come on. He touched her elbow gently. Let's get you some coffee. Something stronger if you need it. But she shook her head. No, I need... She looked around at the ranch, at the mountains, at this place that had become home. I need to walk, to think, alone. Concern flickered in his eyes, but he nodded. Don't go far. She walked to the small rise behind her cabin, where a lone pine offered shade and a view of the valley. The clouds were breaking up, letting through streams of late afternoon light. Beautiful, peaceful, hers, if she chose to claim it. I killed my husband. She said it aloud to the sky, to the mountains, to herself. Not with shame now, but as simple fact. I killed him because he would have killed me. I survived. I ran. I found a place to heal. She stopped, thinking of Silas, of his steady presence and careful hands, of the future they'd agreed to wait for, that maybe didn't need so much waiting after all. When she returned to the ranch, evening was falling. The hands were gathered in the yard, talking low. They looked up at her approach, and she saw nothing but acceptance in their faces. Hell of a thing, Miss Laney, Frank said, standing up to him like that. About time someone told Jake Morrison where to stick his threats, Will added. She felt tears threaten at their easy support. These men who owed her nothing had stood ready to fight for her, because she was one of theirs, because it was right. Thank you, she managed. All of you. Nothing to thank, Frank said gruffly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we got work to finish before full dark. They dispersed, leaving her standing with Silas in the gathering dusk. He watched her with eyes that held questions he wouldn't ask, patience he'd proven, want he no longer completely hid. It's done, she said. Jake might come back, but legally, officially, it's done. Watson made that clear. So what now? She stepped closer to him. Now I stop living for ghosts. Stop letting the past own my future. Stop being afraid of wanting things. What things? Instead of answering with words, she reached up, cupped his face in her hands, saw his breath catch, his eyes darken. I can stay here a few more nights, she asked, echoing her words from months ago. Just to sleep. He turned his head, pressed a kiss to her palm. Laney. That's what I said. Isn't it that first night? Just sleep. And you locked the door and told me to prove it. She smiled, shaky but real. So I'm asking again. Can I stay? You can stay as long as you want, forever if you'll have it. And the lock. He pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, still tied with his leather cord. From now on, no locks, not between us. Just sleep, though, she whispered, teasing now, brave now. He looked at her, this woman who'd walked through fire and come out stronger, who'd faced down her demons and chosen to stay, who stood in his arms now like she belonged there. Well then, he said, voice rough with promise, prove it. She laughed, free and bright as the first stars appearing overhead. Then she kissed him, there in the dying light with the mountains as witness. Kissed him like a woman choosing her future, like someone who'd learned the difference between cages and homes, between locks that trapped and doors that opened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she stepped back. The cabin's been good to me, she said. But maybe it's time I stopped hiding at the edges. Time I moved closer to the center of things. My door's open, he said simply. Has been since the day you arrived. I know, she smiled, real and warm. I just needed time to be brave enough to walk through it. And now I'm done proving things, done running, done being afraid. She took his hand, laced their fingers together. "Now I'm ready to live." They walked toward the main house together, past the cabin that had been her refuge, past the corrals where she'd learned to trust again, past all the markers of a journey from fear to freedom. At the door, he paused. "You sure?" She thought of Thomas, of Wyoming, of all the dark nights when she'd thought happiness was lost to her forever. Then she looked at this man who'd given her space to heal, time to choose, love patient enough to wait until she was ready. "I've never been more sure of anything." He opened the door, gestured her inside. Not to a locked cabin this time, but to a real home, a shared future, a life built on choice instead of fear. She stepped through, turned to face him. "No locks." "No locks," he confirmed, closing the door behind them. "Never again." Outside, night settled over the ranch. But inside, two people who'd found each other across miles of hurt and years of loneliness finally stopped proving they could survive alone. It was time to live together. Time to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. Time to trust that some doors, once opened, were meant to stay that way. Forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed following Lainey and Silas on their journey from fear to freedom, from loneliness to love. If you're listening to this tale of the Old West, please leave a comment below and let me know where you're from. I'd love to connect with fellow Western story enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic tales of frontier life. And if this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and the hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage, redemption, and love in the American West. Until next time, partners.